Hello, we are Coping Life Talk, and trust me, we are online for over 2 years. We have over 100 episodes, and this is our episode number 108. And we are so happy, Scott and I, as a co-host of this podcast, to be back. We took time to process all the changes, and we are back. And especially, we are excited today to host our new co-host, Tim Meng. Hi, Tim. Hi, Scott.
Good evening.
Good evening. So good to see you today. And of course, our Coping Life Talk covers multiple topics. And since today we are ready to celebrate Veterans Day, it is so wonderful to have you, Tim, in the studio because we have quite interest in your experience in Vietnam. And there are lots of different misconceptions about Vietnam, but also lots of reality. And since I don't know much about Vietnam War, how about you, Scott?
I have some familiarity because I grew up here in the U.S. I graduated in 1975 from high school, so I recall seeing the nightly broadcasts uh, about the progress of the war and the troop losses. It was very much imprinted on my memory.
Yeah. So in my case, of course, it's so different. Tim, you understand that growing up in Russia, all it is more from the news, TV, and then, of course, coming to the US, movies. You see how my understanding of Vietnam War is so far from reality. So let's see, Tim, please begin with introducing yourself first and welcome.
Okay, obviously my name is Tim. It's actually Timothy Edward Meng, and I'm 78 years old. Scott talked about graduating from high school in whatever he said, 1970 something. I graduated from high
75.
school in 1963,
Mm.
and my father was a chiropractor before me. I knew I was going to be a chiropractor right out of high school, and at that time that was a possibility. And so I went through chiropractic college, and then I attended classes at Central Missouri State until I went in the military. I went in the military in 1968, trained at Fort Leonard Wood, went to Fort Sam, Houston, Texas to do the medical corpsman training, and in October 68, I was in South Vietnam. I was stationed at a port on a river about an hour from the city of Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City. And I was in a medical detachment that supported about 200 military personnel in the port and a lot of Vietnamese folks who worked in the port, as well as civilians that lived in the area. After my time in Vietnam, I did some training at a Navy hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia, and then went to back to the Army Specialized Treatment Facility at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and got out of the military in 1971. I've been in full-time chiropractic practice in the same business with my father until he passed away in 1984. So I've been there about 56 or 57 years, something like that.
Quite interesting. When you first landed in Vietnam, tell us everything. How did you fly or did you come by ship?
Left from Oakland, California, which was one of the big replacement stations, flew to Hawaii, to the Philippines, and landed in South Vietnam at the Bin Hoa Air Force Base. And it was spooky going in. Um, in the Air Force, if you've ever landed on an Air Force runway, typically they have a vehicle that has a big sign on the back of it that says "Follow me," and the pilot takes you to wherever he says to follow because they didn't want us to stop those airplanes in any one single location. They were all over that airfield. But when they stopped the plane, there were three buses waiting for us that were full of people to get on the plane to go home, and they got off the bus and we got down the ramp and they got on the plane and away they went. And it was spooky going at it. You didn't know what you were getting into when you were going in there. Fortunately, there was nothing military action-wise at the time, but they were taking all the precautions as if that had happened because it was shortly after the Tet offensive that I was in there, and so there was a lot of anticipation that there might be problems. From there, I went to a replacement station and was processed. And late the afternoon, two guys in a Jeep came up from the place I was stationed to pick me up. And I thought, these guys are crazy, and I'm not sure I want to go with them. But I went with them anyway. And uh, found out that, like I say, this was a little different than being a medic in an infantry unit. I was in a dispensary, again, supporting people who worked in the port. A lot of the injuries and the treatment situation was the kind of thing that you would see on a daily basis in any city in the United States. But periodically, we had activities that took place because of the military actions that took place from time to time in our area. And uh, what can I say? I mean, that was what I did. That was where I was. But it was one of those things of going in and not knowing what to expect, and so there was a lot of anxiety going in. Everybody was watching constantly. I mean, it was a state of apprehension most of the time I was over there. That at any time something could happen, but fortunately for me, I wasn't in an area that was hotly contested at the time I was there. It had been earlier before I got there, but it wasn't at the time I was there. The port that I was working at was where they unloaded ammunition. There were anchorages in a great big river that would support three freighter ships coming in from the United States loaded with ammunition, and it was unloaded there, put on shallow draft boats, and pushed upriver to that Benoit Air Force Base ammunition dump. And the military activities that took place in our area usually took place with those boats pushing that ammunition up to the river and back down again to pick more of it up.
Hmm. When when you arrived, the first experience, first day, as I asked you, so you landed and you said, yeah, it's kind of spooky. I
It was very
can,
spooky. Yeah, you
I
didn't know what was
know,
going
but
on.
also think about even the air, lots of humidity.
Very
You
hot, very
just,
humid. Right.
and
Yeah.
look at you. If I put you on a screen, this is just amazing how young you were.
Well, I was one of those people that didn't mind having a flat top haircut before I went in the military. So doing the buzz cut they did in basic training didn't bother me in the least. And once I got to Vietnam, I knew that we had a lot of disease and insects and other problems. And so my thing was, yeah, take the hair off all the time. I didn't need lice or bed bugs or any of the other problems that people had.
Right.
But I'm sure that other soldiers they did have lots of problems.
There were
So who
many
did you
soldiers that had
deal
problems,
with?
yes.
Yeah. So and it's not just the wounds because people come there absolutely unprepared for the
Right.
tropical climate. Am I right? Is it tropical
Well,
considered?
there were many people who had skin afflictions because of the tropical climate, the heat, the humidity. It was difficult to stay clean, and so there were challenges with personal hygiene in some cases. Not that people didn't bathe or shower, but it was just hard to stay clean in that environment.
But so, what did it take for you to understand what, first of all, what kind of first help you needed to provide to your soldiers, to your sort of clients, your patients? So it
Well,
seems like
the
it's mhm.
go ahead.
No, just what it is: diet, nutritions, maybe some skin product, because soldiers came absolutely unprepared. And who were
Right,
they?
exactly.
Were they mostly army
Well, this
or?
was Army, yes. The port was run by a transportation battalion that was an Army transportation battalion, but it was a hybrid area. We had Army, we had Navy, we had
Okay.
Coast Guard, we had Marines. Again, all the people that you think about with ships and ports and transportation. Yes, and then there was a civilian company that actually was the company that was hiring the Vietnamese workers to actually do the work on the ships, the unloading on the ships.
Mm.
So we had this specific architect engineer company that was literally who ran the port. The military was doing all of the other support and the safety and the uh, guards and all the other kinds of things that had to take place there. Yes.
Mm. How many patients did you treat a day?
I wouldn't have any idea. They came in the door until we ran out of them. It was a military base, so you had sick call at 7:30 in the morning, and you had a house full of people until you got finished with them. And sometimes you got finished by noon, and sometimes you were working on them in the afternoon. Um, as far as time on duty over there, it was pretty much 24/7. It wasn't that you worked 24/7, but in what we were doing, we had to have 24-hour coverage. And so again, sometimes you were busy, and other times, you weren't that busy.
Sure.
One of the things that we dealt with was the civilian population around the area. The time I was over there, we delivered 14 babies over the course of that year. It was
Where
Wow.
much
did the
cheaper,
babies come from? Is it from the
obviously,
local people
from the
or?
local people. No, local people. No, they were not U.S. As far as we knew, they were not U.S. involved. They were all local people, but we were free, and the midwives cost money, and so some
Mm.
of the poor people in the area around us chose to come talk to us. And so that was one of the experiences we had. The other thing that was involved with being in that country was that we went out away from the base on medical civic action projects, part of the pacification of the civilian population. So we'd get on a boat and we would go up the river, up canals, whatever we had to go to get to these various villages to do medical care for the people that lived in those villages.
So
Reminds me a little bit of the Hearts and Minds campaign that
Pretty
we
similar,
saw
right? Yeah.
back with the Iraq War and Afghanistan.
Well, again, once things kind of calmed down after the Tet Offensive, then there was more emphasis on meeting the civilian population and trying to win the hearts and minds. Whether it was possible to do that or not was another story, but at
Right.
least we were making that effort. Yes, and there was
How
a
much
orphanage.
Vietnamese?
Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
There was a Catholic orphanage about 2 hamlets away from our port, and one of the things we did was visited those children from time to time because, again, they had very little supplies and support, especially when it came to health care, and so we provided some of that for the orphanage. It was a Catholic orphanage with nuns, and
hmm.
like I say, their resource situation was rather challenging, so we helped them when we could.
The question I have about is how happy you were with all the organization of the clinic. What I mean
Oh,
is that was it anything that you would feel like, well, it's a poor organization, it's frustrating, or was it everything just perfectly organized?
yes.
Very
Depending on
politically correct
any
answer.
minute or any minute or any hour of the day, it was either a Chinese fire drill or it was really well organized, just depending on what was happening. The guys I worked with, there were 7 of us. We worked well together, so it really wasn't a bad situation. But sometimes chaos broke out no matter what you had to work with. But most of the time, we were a good group to work together, and the colonel in charge of the port had come to us at one time or another while we were there, and he said, I know you guys are not directly under me. You're here under me, but you're not directly in my command. So as long as you keep your nose clean and do what you need to do and take care of my people, we get along famously. So, like I say, actually, as far as a military situation was concerned, it was a favorable place. Like I say, the location and heat, humidity, disease, and all the other problems were problems. But as far as the military was concerned, it wasn't like some people in the military with the spit and polish and hate every minute of being in the military. I mean, frankly, I mean, there were times when you had to be very serious and you had to be very careful, and other times I could enjoy that. We had a poster on one of the walls that had a soldier. It was a cartoon, but it was a soldier, and he was running like crazy, and the bullets were flying around him. And the poster had said something: Vietnam would be a beautiful country if it wasn't for the war, famine, pestilence, disease, and all the other things going on. But if you looked at Southeast Asia, the area of Saigon, the French, when they had it, called it the Paris of the Orient. It really was, it's a beautiful tropical, if you can appreciate the tropical situation. But unfortunately, the war and the poverty and the plight of a lot of the people was pretty difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
If you uh, looked at the topography map of where I was stationed, we were 5 feet above sea level. So at high
Wow.
tide during the typhoon, we sometimes were not above sea level, but we were built up on stilts, and we got around the best we could when that happened. And the
Wow.
city of Saigon was kind of like the city of New Orleans. It was on the highest ground in that
Mm.
delta area, but it wasn't very high. I mean, it was just it was the highest place when they built the city. That was where they started out, with that high ground, just like New Orleans when they built it.
Huh.
So everything
Interestingly,
around us was
yeah.
rice paddies and the river and
Oh, sure,
mangrove
sure.
swamps. Yeah, right.
So it sounds like it could be enjoyable if not for the fact of, first of all, war and poverty and climate,
Right. Well,
which is
again, that was a big part of it. I mean, if you were there during the monsoon, you put up with the fact it rained every other day like crazy, and you were wet all the time, and you smelled funky because of mildew. But hey, that was just life over there. Everybody smelled the same, so we didn't worry about it too much.
so. What
Well,
was the
Tim, I've
most
heard that.
common? Yeah, go
No,
ahead,
Sure, go
Scott.
ahead.
no, I was just going to say, speaking of the beauty of the area, every once in a while I see on social media, people will say one of the best places in the world to retire to, if you're going to become an expat, uh, is uh, is Vietnam, and you can live for, I don't know, a third of what you pay here. I'm not sure how accurate those
I don't
statements
know
are.
how accurate that is, but I'll go with that if you say so. There was a resort area right on the South China Sea at the mouth of the Saigon River. It was called Cape Saint Jacques, or Vung Tau in the Vietnamese language. And again, it was a resort, much like if you went to Acapulco or Puerto Vallarta or Cabo San Lucas or something like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Still, we are in a coping topic.
Yeah, I know
So,
we're
Yes.
at the
with all
coping
these
topic. Okay.
attractions and wonderful, maybe events and the beautiful locations, still it was war. And in
It
your
was still war,
mind,
right? Yeah.
yeah, it's war. And so, in your mind, what was the most difficult thing for you to cope with? Since we are coping life talk, so what is that coping mechanism that maybe you had in you, maybe because you're a medic, um, in war, but also maybe you didn't have it and you wished you have it. So what is that that people struggled most with, and also you personally, of course, since it's just absolutely important for us to have you lived through that. So what did you struggle to cope with there?
Well, sometimes the issue of uh, again in the military needing certain support, and we were in such a backwater area that that support was not coming very frequently. Um, that was the frustration of the military as far as dealing with people. Sometimes the frustration of not speaking the language and being able to
Yeah,
understand when we're working with those folks. Fortunately, we had ways of dealing with that. One of the pictures you saw in my picture book was a nurse. She worked for the Pacific Architect Engineer firm, but when we looked at her facility, which was about the size of a broom closet, and we looked at our facility, and we said to the manager of the Pacific Architect and Engineers, how about if we merge on this medical care situation? And eventually we had her in our dispensary to help us deal with the Vietnamese workers that she was there to support, as well as the Vietnamese civilians. And so that eased some of the frustration of the language barrier.
yeah,
There was a village of Cat Lai outside of the base that we were at, and there was a boy who was I guess 10 or 12, I don't know, but his name was Mui, but he spoke English pretty effectively. And so when the village people had a problem and they tried to get to see us, typically they'd find Mui and he'd go to the front gate and start talking to the security guards, and he could con his way past the security guards from time to time. He didn't necessarily come into the compound, but he could get the security guards to call us, and we'd go out and try to figure out what we needed to do to help the people. And of course, if we escorted them onto the base, that was okay, but the security people couldn't let them on the base. But
Let me show then. Yeah, it's exactly. I will show you the slide from your photo album. And it was so enjoyable for us at Independence First last week to sit down with your photo album, with your memories, and kind of look through. And of course, now we have a privilege to hear more about those photographs. So, what you're talking about, what I would never know that you actually treated Vietnamese people. And so
right,
tell us
yes,
a little about this. Seems like on the left side, what is that picture? Is it
that was the front door to our dispensary, and it says Katlai. It might be a little hard to see the CAT, but it was Katlai Dispensary. And the medical doctor with us was Dr. Wallace. He had been a Green Beret for the first 6 months he was in Vietnam, and then he was with us the last 6 months of his service.
mm,
We had two other doctors during the time I was there. One was unfortunately a gynecologist, and all he could think of was, "What in the heck am I doing out here with you clowns? I should be in a
Yeah.
hospital someplace where there's female personnel." But
Yeah.
he was pretty cool. I mean, we got along fine with him. But so that's what that front door is. Obviously, doing shots and vaccinations for various conditions with the Vietnamese people. More often than not, that was probably a tetanus shot, but that was a frequent challenge for people being injured by puncture wounds doing the things that they did.
when you were sent to Vietnam, did you have to be vaccinated prior
Oh,
to
yes,
be?
right.
So what was the kind of a set of vaccinations that you had to take before you go?
Oh, there were about 3 cycles of vaccinations, but you were dealing with dysentery and typhoid
Is
and
it malaria too?
smallpox. Oh, always malaria, but there's no defense for malaria in a vaccination. Malaria was dealt with on a weekly basis with a great big orange pill that was a prophylactics for malaria, and um, you took it under penalty of court martial if you didn't take it because
Oof.
if, well, the issue is you were not to get ill with malaria. That was really the
Right.
challenge. And so there was a prophylaxis to keep that from happening. It was kind of like being in the British Army. If you ended up with a blister on your foot, that was a court martial offense because you were supposed to take care of your feet if you were an infantry person
Yeah.
and not have that kind of thing happen. Well, the malaria thing was that way with us.
Did you have lots of malaria among soldiers,
Not among soldiers, but it wasn't among the civilian
among
population.
civilian
We
population?
figured that any civilian in that country that lived to age 10 probably had outlived 8 or 10 major pandemic type diseases that would
Oh
happen in
my.
that area: malaria, yellow fever, cholera, typhoid, those kinds of issues. There
Hmm.
was plague over there too. Living in a rat infested area, that was a possibility from time to time as well.
Wow. But so then another slide that we have is it's you on the top or on
That's
the
me.
hood of the vehicle ambulance, right?
Ambulance, right. We had
So,
3 vehicles in that situation. The truck you see over the top of the ambulance, a jeep, and then an ambulance. And the ambulance was my responsibility to maintain. So even though I know very little about mechanics, my sergeant said, "Okay, Meng, you're in charge of the ambulance." And said, "But Sarge, I don't know anything about maintenance." He said, "I'll take you to the motor pool. You'll learn. It's kind of like me
You'll
with
learn.
this
Yeah.
Airstreaming thing. You'll learn, whatever."
Yeah.
And I said, "Why me?" And he said, "Well, because I can count on you. If I send you down there by yourself to take care of the machine, I know when you come back, it'll be taken care of. Some of the other people, I'm not too sure whether that'll happen or not. We'll see."
oh wow. So we have a question here. Let me
Sure.
put it on the screen. So here it is. At the in the aftermath, just a second, I will remove the slides. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, what coping mechanisms have you found most effective for dealing with stresses and memories that accompany such profound experience?
Well, that was where the biggest challenge was for me. I was on the run over there and uh, busy and try to stay busy. And when I came back and I had a letdown, that was when I got in trouble. And it was fortunate for
Mm,
me, I wasn't released from the military when I came home from Vietnam. I stayed in for um, quite a while after that, a year and a half or more. And so I went through my uh, depression rehabilitation on the Army's ticket rather than as a civilian trying to deal with it.
So
I got
it,
very depressed and
uh,
mm,
I was basically a zombie. I would go to work at 7:30 in the morning. I would do the job I was there to do until 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I'd go back to the barracks and I'd just fall down on the bunk and fall asleep. And I'd get up the next morning at 6 o'clock and go back and repeat again. And I talked to some mental health people, and I got off my rear end and started running, and it just took charge of my life again. But for a while, I was kind of a mess in depression, just the letdown coming back out of that situation.
hmm. But so how did
I,
it then? How did you deal with the reintegration back into the civil life?
Well, after another year and a half, I was a reasonably normal human being again. I got married in that situation, and I probably helped the situation considerably, but I wasn't a basket case by the time I got married, but somewhere a couple of months after I came back from Vietnam, it was kind of that situation. But
Hmm.
again, my thing is to stay busy, to stay active, to
yeah,
get involved with things, and it didn't do any good to just feel sorry for myself. So, like I say, I talked to some people that were mental health people, um, and just decided to pick up. And I was already a chiropractor for it in the military, so I knew a lot of things about healthcare
mm,
uh, going in. And the issue is when you're in depression. Um, you may need the help. You need to have a lifeline to hang on to, but the issue is you got to take charge yourself and pick up and get going for yourself. And so that was what I did, and eventually I came out of it.
Hmm. But help me then.
So, as like I say, sometimes people that would have been bad in Vietnam. Well, I was so busy running around doing things over there, I didn't have time to be depressed. It was only when I let down. Much like a lot of
yeah.
people who are under, some stress or anxiety. Young couple getting ready to get married, and they're running and going and doing crazy things, and they go on the honeymoon, and both of them come down ill a week after they go on their honeymoon because they just finally let
Mm,
up on the gas, and then they start
yeah.
not being able to hold on to the activities they're holding on to. And I kept my foot on the gas for over a year doing the Vietnam thing. It's finally when I let up, I just probably just let up a little too much. So that was kind of the
Hmm.
issue. So as far as
But so
coping
what
was
was the
concerned, it
trigger?
was
Yeah.
uh, eating in a very healthy way. What's that?
Just
I'm
what
sorry.
was the
What did you say?
trigger? How did it start? Your depression. What triggered that? I mean, it seems like life was not like, the bombs were not
I have
flying
no.
around.
I have no idea. I think I just was it was going too fast, too hard, and when I let up on it, that's when it caught up with me. I don't know there
How
was
old
any
were you?
trigger mechanism. It was just old enough to know better.
Yeah, old enough. But how
I was
old?
about four or
How
5 years
actual
older than most.
age? When you
What's
came
that?
there, how old? How old were you? Looking at
Well,
this
I
picture,
had already
you're very
graduated from
young.
college, so I must have been about 23 or 24.
Oh my gosh, such
But
a
Mm,
most of the people I
child,
was
yes.
working with were 17, 18, 19.
Wow.
The guys I work with all called me the old man because I was 3 or 4 years older than they were.
wow.
Mm. Did you lose any of your clients? Did you lose anybody from your friends or your patients, your commanders there?
No, we lost some people. We lost some people from the transportation battalion, but none of the people that were in my group itself that I knew of. Um,
Hmm.
we all managed to stay out of that situation. But we did have people that worked in the command that had been injured. We had to evacuate them out of the country, and there were a couple of people who perished in the process of things going on. Yeah, probably one of the most disgusting things that I had to do, and I didn't do it by myself, but our group was have to retrieve some people out of the river after they'd been in the river for 8 or 10
Mm,
days, and that was
Mm,
not a real
mm,
pleasant
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
mm. Scott, do you have any questions?
Oh, goodness. Well, I guess one of the questions was, how's your Vietnamese?
Uh, I might be able to get by in a bar very, very succinctly. The one fellow that I ran around with over there had done 6 months in special services before he came to us. He was a bass guitar player, and he worked for social
Oh,
services or whatever it was in Saigon. So when we go to Saigon, he knew where all the best bars were and where the best restaurants were, and he could speak enough of the language that we could get by.
oh,
But
nice. Nice. Yeah.
we take people into the city to the hospitals, and once we delivered them, yeah, we didn't have to hurry back to where we came from, so we'd go find a restaurant and eat before we go back to Cat Lai.
Well, if you go now to Vietnam, will you be able to communicate a little, like you said, going to the bar?
Probably not. I have two
Probably not.
sons. My number two son actually went to Vietnam a few years
Oh,
ago. He just wanted to go see the place. And of course, he called me and said, "Dad, you want to go over with me?" And I said, "My gosh, I left nothing behind. I need to go to retrieve. I am not interested in going back to that place." Again, I'm not saying it was a bad place. I don't want to, repeat going back to that area.
But since you mentioned depression, and then do you
Yes,
think, like, going back to the place where, even like childhood place, and sometimes, like, I don't want to go to my hometown yet. I'm not ready. I'm afraid it will be very overwhelming. Nostalgia is a cruel thing, but also you went through depression there, and it's hard. So, do you think that
right,
if you go back, it kind of will might hit you again? Because, in a way, luckily, you were not wounded there. You survived. You came
right,
back. What
exactly,
about
right.
Agent Orange? Was it in any way close to where you
We
were?
we were actually in the delta of the Saigon Dong Nai rivers, and so there was no jungle to be
Oh,
mm,
defoliated. So
right.
Agent Orange wasn't an issue in our area. When you went to the highlands, the hills and the mountain countries where there were trees, that was why they defoliated, was because of the transportation under the canopy of the jungle. And if you're ever in the jungle, there's at least a 2 or 3 layer canopy above you if you're on the ground. And so they had to use Agent Orange to defoliate the trees so they could actually see the trucks and the other things moving down on the ground level.
so
So
did
what,
you
like I say, where we were, it was all rice paddies and river and mangrove swamps, but not trees that were
not trees?
jungle, that kind of
Okay.
thing.
Yeah, because I had quite a few church members who were exposed to Agent Orange,
Right. Well,
and of
again,
course, yeah, oh, the consequences are
the
horrible.
people that would have come out of, say, the central or the northern part of Vietnam, they were dealing with that highland area. But down in
Right.
the either the Mekong or the Saigon or the Dong Nai River deltas, we were far enough away from Agent Orange that wasn't an issue.
Okay, so here we have a comment. Let me put it on the screen. Um, what are some misconceptions about veterans that you would like to address based on your own experience? And next to that is, why do so many veterans end on the streets?
I'm not sure I can answer those, but I know when I came back, the feeling in 1968 or 69 was that if you'd been to Vietnam, you were a baby burner and you were somebody that was going around killing people out of
Yeah.
spite, if anything else. And so, like I say, when I was stationed at that Navy hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia, I wanted to take a side trip to uh, up to good gravy, Williamsburg, Virginia, the colonial restoration at Williamsburg, and I bummed a ride with a couple of Navy guys. And the only clothes I had for winter were my military uniform. And they said, "We'll take you as far as the outer gate for that area, but we don't want to be seen with you in uniform because uh, that's a very unpopular thing to be seen in. So that
Mm.
was kind of the situation there. But again, as long as you were on a military base, that wasn't much of an issue. But when you got off of a base, a lot of the civilian population, not everybody, but a lot of the civilian population kind of looked at you as if you were, Captain, um, whatever his name was at My Lai, that kind of an attitude.
Oh, yeah.
Seems like Vietnamese,
Cali, what's
yeah,
that?
Vietnamese people were friendly toward
I
Americans.
I got along fine with the Vietnamese people I worked with. I was uh, dealing with, let's say, Vietnamese people with healthcare, Vietnamese people as far as doing the medical civic action activity, the orphanage activity. Like I say, I didn't have a real problem. Um, Language obviously was an issue, but enough pidgin English, Vietnamese, sign language, we could get
Mhm.
by with that kind of a thing. I was one of those not so ugly Americans. When I sat down with Vietnamese people to eat, I didn't ask them what they were fixing or what they were preparing. I just ate it. Some of the guys I was
Yep.
with, oh, I'm not going to eat that kind of stuff. I don't know what you're preparing, monkey, cat, dog, whatever.
Must be cat. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I never did that. Of course, the Vietnamese people I worked with, oh, you're the good GI. You don't ever you make a comment against what we're doing. You'll try anything at least one time. You may not come back a second time, but at least you'll try it. And a lot of them were prejudiced against trying anything.
Yeah. But so since you went through such an interesting experience and very, I would say, formative experience as
Right.
a young man, how did it affect you to become who you are now?
Well, I learned after going through the experience of the Depression how to uh, you know, keep treading water and moving forward and not falling back on that again. I had one other slight period in my life when my wife and I were having some challenges, but worked through that and came back out of it again.
Hmm.
It's a
Kind
cycle
of
that sometimes
balancing,
people go
yeah.
through. But again, the issue is uh, change your diet, start exercising, burn off the adrenaline that's part of the stress chemistry that's going on
Yeah.
inside of you, and keep moving. And so, I
True.
kind of put on this happy-go-lucky facade on the outside so that people don't see what I really think about or look at 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes. But
But yeah,
everybody
let's
has
talk
those
a
kind of
little.
things.
Yeah, let's talk a little about it because people have a tendency to put a facade. And then,
Right.
since we are coping life talk, as a medical professional, would you consider it healthy? Would you consider it it's a coping mechanism or hiding behind your feelings, your fears, or depression, or maybe sadness, or I don't know, the range of emotions and feelings that you have? That's what I think. Some people like you are a very strong person. I don't know you for too long, but I could acknowledge your strength, and I think partially, I think it is connected to your Vietnam experience because
Well,
everything in life shapes us. And you
right.
can say,
Right.
but also the question was about why do so many veterans end on the street, out on the street? So could it be because people did not have that coping mechanism, how to process, first of all, PTSD, post-traumatic um, stress disorder, and then fear, and then loud sounds. You can put a facade for sometimes, but at one point you just don't want to wake up. Could it happen because of that?
Yes, it could. Again, the issue is if you really were in a combat situation and you saw the sort of things that people in combat see, sometimes it really scars folks. Other people, kind of have a situation of a feeling of entitlement, and when they come out of the military, they think people owe them something, and they kind of don't initiate and go on for themselves. And the next thing you know, they fall into a grease slide going downhill and get themselves in trouble, either emotionally or family wise, spiritually, whatever else it is, because like I said, they feel somebody needs to take care of them rather than them picking up by their bootstraps and doing things for
Mhm,
themselves.
mhm.
Uh, that would have been my thought. That you may have a different idea about that, but
No,
that
I
was.
don't have any. I hadn't been in that situation, having a war experience and then processing this. That's what I'm so curious about, this coping mechanism, but also uh, pain management. Since now we are going to who you are now, and that's what I think our whole interest to hosting you today, to understand that connection between who you were as a young man and you came with your chiropractor experience into a military and then you came back. And so here you're working with people, and tell me if a chiropractor is dealing with lots of physical pain.
Well, we deal with all kinds of things because uh, the thing about chiropractic is part of our education, part of our training is the philosophy of chiropractic, not just the technical aspects of chiropractic. And while we don't want to mix chiropractic and religion, there's a lot of crossover in that situation. In the chiropractic philosophy, we believe in a universal intelligence. We're not going to the church thing of God, but it's the same concept, and that
Hmm.
each one of us has a spark of life within us that's the innate intelligence, and that there is a communication between the innate intelligence and the universal intelligence, and sometimes the pathways of that information moving back and forth get skewed, and that's why people get themselves into trouble. And so a fair amount of what chiropractic is about is trying to help people get the innate activity within their body working more efficiently so that they have that communication with the universal. And again, we're not talking religion. We're not trying to make chiropractic a religion, but there's a very good crossover. Same kind of thing with the movie of Star Wars, The Force.
Mm.
Again, we chiropractors love that movie because it talks about the same thing we talk about. And again, in church, we talk about God and the spiritual aspects that way. But the chiropractic philosophy was pounded into me as a child, much less when I went to college. And so I kind of work with that all the time. Like I say, sometimes I may have dropped the ball a little bit there after Vietnam, but the issue was getting that innate intelligence in me back into interaction with the universal intelligence, or like we talk about in church, you know, getting back right with that. One of the things that was very helpful. I lost my wife about 9 years ago, 9.5 years ago, and I was
Mm.
in a real funk after that happened. But I again talked to an individual and went through grief counseling for about 10 weeks. And at the end of that 10-week period, the grief counselor was one of the people involved in Curcio. And
Ah,
she talked me into going to Curcio for the first time. And of course, the question was, "Have you ever been?" No. What is it? I don't know. But you need it. You go. And of course, at the time, the minister has to sign off for you to go. He didn't want to sign off because he thought it was too close to the loss of my wife. And she said, "No, no, he's been through all the grief management. He's the way to go." Anyway, I went, and it was one of the better turnarounds of my life. And the
mm.
reason you got me as such an ornery person in your church is because I picked up and started really going to town with that a few years ago. One of the things that we talked about in there was, you know, there was a time in our church when you did disciple training. The 12 or 14 people going through the class, and at about the 49th week, you evaluated each other on leadership and healing and spirituality and either 8 or 10 subjects. And I scored the highest of anybody in my class in every subject except spirituality, and I was dead last in spirituality. And after I went through Cursillo, I said, okay, I think I've got it going the other direction again now. So that
Right.
was another positive feature in that one. More than you probably wanted to hear, but there you go. That was part of my coping, was going through that.
Good. So, Scott, do you have any questions to
Oh
Tim?
my goodness! I was reminded of what you shared about PTSD and depression.
Hmm.
I recall an experience in high school where I was working in a kitchen at a restaurant, and I was a line cook, and we had a guy there on the line. I was warned never come up to Tony on his right side,
He had a knife in his hand. Huh?
and they said if you startle him on his right side, he's going to come unglued. Well, he had come back from Nam,
Hmm.
and apparently, he had a pretty good case of PTSD. So they said, if you're going to come up on him, give him a fair warning from about 10 feet away,
Right.
and then
Hmm.
you'd be okay. But don't do it without the warning. So
Well,
it
again, if
seriously
you've
had
been in
some
that
impact
combat
on
situation,
me.
I can understand that. Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Well, there was a
Brilliant.
period of time there that when I first came home from Vietnam, another issue, we had people that had been burned in various situations over there. And when I came home, for some reason, my mother prepared some kind of barbecued chicken, and I got ill. And I said,
Mm.
okay, we're not doing that anymore. We'll do other things, but let's not have anything that gets burned like that because it brought back too much of a
Oh
memory of
gosh,
people with burn injuries that we dealt with. Yeah.
yeah.
So again, that's maybe not the same thing as the person you're talking about, but that was one of the reactions I had. Was just the other thing was I for the longest time I couldn't walk into a room with an overhead fan. Um, you know,
Mm.
running people from uh, uh, our dispensary out to a helicopter, you had to duck to get under the helicopter rotary
Yeah.
wings, and I just was spooked about getting under an overhead fan for the longest time. I'd walk around the
Wow.
room near the wall rather than get underneath it. It was just one of my little foibles.
So there were not only physical injuries that guys came back with, but psychological
Psychological,
injuries.
yeah, impressions of various
Yeah.
psychological activities, right? Yep.
Mhm.
Uh,
We've got a question here,
Yes.
Tim. How do you integrate the coping skills you developed during your military service into the day to day stresses and challenges of running a business and providing
hmm.
healthcare?
Well, one of the biggest issues, and you know it from being in the ministry, is being a listener.
Hmm.
Listening to what people are talking about and then trying to discern what really are they talking about and what are they hiding and where are they going or where are they not going, and then trying to help them figure out perhaps confrontationally what it is that they really need to come in contact with. Because, like I say, we're looking at this issue in chiropractic of innate intelligence and universal intelligence, and trying to get people back into that kind of a balance. Whether we're talking to them about uh, a marital concept or a business occupational thing. Big part of what we deal with in chiropractic is day-to-day stress, the stress of sitting at a computer all day not moving, the stress that comes out of watching a television in a lazy chair with your head propped up and your neck in a skewed up posture, and then people come in and say, I don't know what I did. I didn't have an accident. I didn't fall. Well, the occupational stress of just day in and day out
Yeah.
living puts them into a problem that chiropractors deal with a great deal. But many times they're in denial that any of that's taking place until you have worked with them for a period of time. So a part of it's the communication skill of trying to get people past the concept that the only thing that could happen wrong to me is some trauma or some injury, like a car accident or a fall down the basement steps or whatever they might perceive as the accident thing. But 80% of the patients' issues coming into a chiropractic office usually are occupational stress, and I don't necessarily mean their job that they
Mm.
get paid for it. It's whatever they do in life occupationally, repetitive activity, you know, marital, emotional, financial, life and death, tax assessment from Jackson County, all kinds of challenges and issues that take place in people's lives, but try to help them get themselves back into some kind of a balance between how they're internal systems work and what the universal uh, intelligence of God, what is that energy working in the universe, and what are we trying to do to be in balance with it?
Hmm. Question I have, and I know that you mentioned when you were in Vietnam, you delivered a few babies,
Right,
though
14
it's
of
not
them.
14 of those. Okay,
Mm.
so can you explain to me why the mortality, infant mortality, is going up in the states of Missouri, as well as the mothers who just gave birth. So, what is that in our medical system that allows that? What is it? Our health? Women maybe become less healthy, or babies are born not as healthy, or is it something that can be prevented?
I'm not an OBGYN,
I
so I may
know,
not
I
have
know.
I may not have the answers you're looking for, but the basic issue is that nutritionally in our society we eat way too
Mm.
many processed foods,
Yeah.
Mm,
and the suggestion that I make to people, just horsing around with them, but if Adam and Eve couldn't find a Dr. Pepper machine anywhere in the garden, why are you drinking Dr. Pepper or whatever the issue is that they're doing? In other words, our bodies were designed to work on a diet that was more leafy vegetables and perhaps fruits and nuts and other things, but it wasn't to live on the processed wheat, rice, barley, oats coming out of overproduction of grain-based products. And of course, it's not just the corn on the cob on the bowl on the 4th of July. It's the cow that lived on corn for all of its life, the chicken that lived on corn, the other animals, and the highly inflammatory chemistry that we put into our bodies. And some people, their balance of omega-3, omega-6 should be about 1 to 1, and a lot of people it's 50 to 1, 60 to 1. So they're
Mm.
running around in this inflammatory state. Well,
Mm.
mm,
whenever anything goes wrong in your body, the inflammation is part of the repair, the healing, the focus that your body uses to make the repair. But if you keep pouring kerosene on the fire of inflammation, it just keeps getting further and further out of control.
mhm.
Now, I
Yeah.
don't know that that's all the answer to your baby
No, that's a
mortality
very
issue.
good answer, and I
Yeah,
intentionally asked this, and and I know that this is a pleasure of being a podcast host, that you can ask any question, and but not to put our guest in a kind of
it's
under.
not on the questionnaire here. Come on.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, rub my nose. But the thing is that I'm curious because listening to you, and I did not know that you delivered 14 babies, and I thought because of you, you have that global perspective on life. And I think that takes us back to your experience in Vietnam and dealing with people who spoke different language. I noticed working with you how curious you are, and kind of your perspective on things is kind of broader than normal. And that's what I thought. Yeah, I could ask Tim because that's what bothers me. That, and since you just mentioned nutritions, and thank you for that information and explaining to our viewers what it is and what it does to our bodies. At the same time, I also think that you thank you for your honesty and telling about your depression in Vietnam and how you process it since we're coping and teaching our audience, our people who watch us to learn to develop that tool. And of course situations are different, but still if you have at least something in your kind of portfolio sort of on your list of, oh, this is my coping skill and I can work on this more, or listening to you I would say, I want to add this skill to my on my list. But so then again, we do not promise our audience that life will be free from difficulties and struggles and adversities, right? Can it be?
That's correct.
No. But so
Yep.
then tell us, since we're getting close to our podcast ending, what is the transforming lesson from your past experience, from past adversities, that you were able to transform into strength and become who you are now?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I don't really
Oh, but
know.
let's try
The,
together.
the, the,
Yeah.
the, the biggest thing, and I've already mentioned these things, the first thing is to stay busy and stay curious and stay active, looking at life. I do a lot of things you may or may not even know I do. I'm a Boy Scout leader. I am active in Rotary. I'm the on the board of the foundation board of Cleveland Chiropractic College. I'm the foundation chairperson. I'm obviously active in church. I do a lot of things as well as having a full-time practice. The big thing is to stay busy and stay active. One of the things is, don't go looking at life for all the negative things. You may find them, but don't keep looking for them and compounding them. Try to find. One of the things you may have heard me say since you've known me is when somebody asks how you are, and my answer is always, I'm nearly perfect. You're looking at the glass being half full no matter how empty it
Yep.
is, rather than looking at how empty it is no matter how full it is. So that's part of it. I don't
Oh,
I
that's
don't know
absolutely, yeah.
if that's
That's the
your
best.
answer or not, but that's
That's a
my
very
answer.
good answer, and thank you for reminding me about half full and half empty glass. Because I think what you do in life and your personal experience and example actually point at that you live it. And I think you see your life as a glass full rather than even half full. I think you live a full life, and I just know how much you do in the church and volunteering. But so then I also know that you are very active with the Chamber of Commerce. So my question to you
I'm
is,
not in the Chamber of Commerce. I'm active with Rotary, but not the Chamber of
oh, oh,
Commerce.
oh, oh,
Rotary, yes.
oh, Rotary, tell us a little
Rotary.
more because this, okay, yeah, that's my mistake. So tell us about it because this organization is actually passionately working with the community.
Right. The
Okay,
the
say,
motto is
yeah.
service above self. Yes,
Does
exactly.
it deal in any way with veterans?
I don't know that there's a direct connection with veterans, but the issue we do a great many things, and Rotary is universal. It's around the world. So there's what our club may do here in Independence, but we're in a connection, much like the Methodist Church is connectional all the way around the world. And so we have worldwide projects as well as some more regional projects as well as local projects. The current big international project is to eliminate polio on planet Earth, and we're down to two
Mm.
countries after 30 some years that still have
Wow.
native polio. And unfortunately, Afghanistan and Pakistan are two countries that are difficult to try to get into to do anything about it. But
Right.
Rotary continues to deal with that as their probably top international project, but there are many other things that we do. We've got a literacy connection in Honduras that our club works through, and again, a lot of other relief things that take place, much like UMCOR does with the Methodist Church. Very similar
Mhm.
kind of an idea.
Yeah. And UMCOR, if people don't know what UMCOR stands for, it is United Methodist Committee on Relief. So maybe one day in our podcast we will talk more about it because it is a very important organization, nonprofit. And in our other podcast we will be talking about the mission for Russia back in the 90s. But this is another topic. But today, of course, I wanted just to kind of summarize what we talked about. So that your experience as a veteran, tomorrow is a Veterans Day. First of all, I want to thank you. Thank you for serving your country, and thank you for developing that global perspective, being so friendly with people you served in Vietnam. I remember the first thing you told me about Vietnam that you worked with the translator. And
Mm.
today you confirmed that you said how important it was to have a nurse who spoke English and she was able to translate back and forth. And that's another illustration how we are all together living in one planet and we need to learn to understand each other to reduce this tension and finally end this threat of war and this uncertainty that we live in is what I think our Coping Life Talk tries to help people to deal with. Show your example how you were able to transform even some negative moments and negative memories and depression into somebody who you are now, promoting peace, promoting joy, promoting full cup, and just simply being who you are. And Scott, thank you so much for your questions. Any questions in the end?
Yeah, I did have one question. So my family has has had many members in the military. And I won't go into the details, but I have a daughter who's now serving in the medical area of the Air Force, and she's in her mid 30s. What message would you want to convey to her and to other young people who are currently serving today in the U.S. military?
Probably the biggest thing is focus on the job you have right in front of you, even though you may be looking forward and training for the next promotion or the next step that you're looking for, but don't get so far ahead that you don't pay attention to what's doing right there in your hand today. Just like in chiropractic, you put hands on people, you got to be right there at that point, at that time with them. So that would be perhaps my suggestion to her. Stay focused on what you're doing right at the moment, even though you may be projecting for the future.
Interesting that today mentioned one
Good word.
more word and skill, listening. And I think it connected to what you just said. Yeah, but be aware of where you are. Don't get ahead of yourself, and also listen to other people. Thank you so much, Tim. And
You're
I
welcome.
also want to, again, one more time to remind our audience that Tim Meng is our new co host for Coping Life Talk. And we look forward to have your expertise, your compassion. That's one of the qualities that I admire in you, compassion. And with your gift of listening, I think our guests will enjoy it and they will want to come back. So, our audience, please post your questions because we plan to have a questions and answers released in 2 3 days. So watch on Facebook that if you have any questions about Vietnam, about Tim, about his life, he will be able to answer them. So thank you so much for being with us today, and God bless you all. Watch how you live in this world full of uncertainties, and talk to people like Tim, and hopefully Scott and I can help. But come back to our Coping Life Talk. For now, we will be going live every other Saturday. And so, if you have an interesting guest, we will have the next guest is a young woman who will be sharing her story about her grandma who was able to escape a German concentration camp during after the war. So, and even now, when she's a young woman, never ever experienced war, she starts crying, even simply talking about her grandmother and what she went through. So, our Coping Life Talk is back, and we are happy to host Tim Mean today. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.